In the 1500s in Italy, there was a very unique family that invested in silkworms. Silkworms were an amazing piece of that culture because silkworms really do produce silk. And if you're wearing anything silk, a worm produced it. For centuries, this family had devoted itself to the development of silk. During World War II, there was a man in that family who started making clothing. He found a cheaper way to do silk than silkworms. He would follow around the American infantry and collect their torn and busted up parachutes, which in World War II was made out of silk. And he would take them home and make parachute pants. And he would sell them at a very, very high profit because silk is valuable no matter where you get it from. But of course, something changed. Change is always hard. Something changed. And that something was that from the traditional silk industry and the traditional clothing and the traditional furniture that used this, there was a product that was synthetic. And so in 1956, this young boy who grew up in a world that was ultra traditional in that they were making garments and certain clothes and making products out of silkworms that they had farmed from their family's traditional inheritance for years and years. But in the post-war collapse of the silk market, synthetic fabrics, cheaper Asian alternatives obliterated Italy's traditional silk industry. Again, let me repeat myself. Change is hard. Change isn't easy. Change dispenses with sometimes decades, if not centuries, of tradition without getting rid of the values around that tradition. There's a young man who founded the company called Adler. He could not grow under his father's leadership, and so he founded a side thing. And as a child, he had been playing with these long rectangular tubes that were used to transport silk, and it kept them dry. You screw the cap on, and they were polyurethane, and they would be all over his dad's factory floor or whatever. I'm not going to get into what else this was used for, and it's not important to my story. But he became fascinated with how he could melt it, shape it, how he could heat a wire and cut it, design and pattern it. And so he began to take synthetic materials that were on the floor, and he found some that were extremely hardy and durable. And he began to make cushions and seats that were not made out of leather, that were not stitched with the traditional things. And because the traditional cars, Fords, Model Ts, and all the early ones, they were made out of horsehair and some springs. But he began in 1932 to offer many different things to the industry. And so eventually he forms a company that works with polyurethane, latex, and other materials. And so chances are you don't think very much about your car seats. But car makers, particularly the luxury brands, spend as much time thinking about seats as they do almost any other part of the vehicle. And so the first part of a vehicle that they're obsessed with is the engine. The second part is the seats, and all seats are designed off of hip points. And the H points in these seats are designed to where it's the maximum comfortableness. So anyhow, he forms up this company, and polyurethane is what he was making seats out of, and nobody was really getting involved in it. But then he began to take the materials and he began to form dashboards, and he began to form floorboards. And he noticed something, that the noise reduced incredibly when he did this. And so he started in the 60s, he was designing and playing around with carbon fibers and pretty much did the same thing. And so what he did is, the young entrepreneur, he soon figured out that Alfa Romeos? The panels were all made out of metal, but there was a connecting point that when they tried to put the gas cap in, it moved, and the gas cap caused it to not function properly. So he goes to Alfa Romeo, and there's a car called Alfa 33s. It's the design. It's probably one of their most famous cars. And this young man, I think I'm saying his name right, Scudieri, he recognizes the flaw in the fuel cap, and he developed a mold and a seal test, and he got it approved by the factory, and then he went to Milan and pitched it to them, and they bought into it, okay? Now, as with all good salespeople, they will tell you it's not the no's that you got to worry about, okay? It's not how many no's you get, it's how many yeses. You hit one good jackpot in life, and you'll forget about all the rejection you ever suffered through, okay? So he's thinking in his mind, so I have this contract with Alfa Romeo, but the same problem's got to be in Ferrari. Now, I could sit here and talk for 2 hours on Enzo Ferrari, okay? I've never owned a Ferrari, and I've been in several of them, but I've never owned one, okay? But they are my favorite car. Enzo Ferrari, he was a race car driver guy, and he's driving cars, and he says, you know what, I just love the industry, and I want to get involved, and I want to help them make a better car. So this young man named Enzo Ferrari shows up at this is the greatest story to me. He shows up at the factory of Fiat, and he asks Fiat for a job. And they said, no, we don't need anybody who just knows how to drive around in a car. You don't know anything about cars other than how to just push the gas pedal. And so Fiat turns down this young man named Enzo Ferrari. Well, Enzo Ferrari's worth several biographies. Any book you find on Ferrari, Enzo Ferrari, as a biography, buy it and read it. It's a fascinating story. So he says, okay, you don't want the job? Fine. I'm going to start seeing if I can get into it myself. And he does. Okay, well, then there's a tragedy in his family, and I can't remember this, so I don't want to actually quote when and what it was, but I think it was like somewhere around 1957, 59, his son dies. And Enzo Ferrari, by this time, he's made Ferrari a household name in the world. And and he just goes into depression, right? And he's like this recluse. And so, and now it's 1982, I think, in this story. And so in 1982, Scudery has he has Alfa Romeos locked up. He's got Mercedes-Benz. He's got Fiats. He's got Volvo. He's got any car that's any car. He's got them. But he notices that Ferrari is breaking down. Not breaking down physically, but the image is breaking down. They're not winning the races. They're not in the cutting edge anymore. And so he finds out what is the birthday of Enzo Ferrari. Now, at the time, Enzo Ferrari lived way up northern Italy. And Scudery, he was from southern Italy. And they made fun of them people, and they thought they were idiots and stupid. And you know, a lot like it is right now. I go to Italy fairly often. Northern Italy pretty much wants nothing to do with southern Italy, and southern Italy just kind of feels beat down, and they're not as good as Milan and Venice and Florence and Rome and Tuscany and all them places. But so there's a real rivalry within the culture. Anyhow, so he's from Naples, and Scudery is like, well, I don't know if he'll ever talk to me. So what he does is he sends Enzo Ferrari a birthday card and tells him, I do interiors and I can make your cars quieter, but I believe that I could take your dashboards and redesign them with non-traditional materials, and I believe that it'll be different and you'll win. Now, in case you don't know, at this time, Ferrari, he's driving the 250 GTO. It's called the world's most revered modern car. It was only 39 of them were produced. And in 2018, one of them went to auction, and it sold for $48.4 million to an unknown buyer. The previous record for the most expensive car sold at auction was $38.1 million, and that was set in 2014 in the auction by, and consequently, another Ferrari. But Ferraris are the most famous cars. So Scudery says, look, if I could get this guy and I could get this contract, I think I could do this. So he says to him, you know, happy birthday, and this is who I am, and this is what I could do to help you. So months go by. He hears nothing, and he thinks, yeah, this is going to be no deal. He's not going to. He just went about doing his business, and he went about just filling his Alpha 33 contract and whatever. All of a sudden, he gets his mail one night, and he opens the envelope, and I'm reading this, okay? Inside was a short note handwritten by Enzo Ferrari himself. The racing legend thanked Scudery for his birthday wishes, and to the young man's profound disbelief, summoned him to a meeting at the company's headquarters in Maranello. Ferrari provided the date and time of the appointment and said he will be there and be pleased to receive Scudery in his office. Now, what is Scudery's reaction? Is shock, elation, disbelief. But you know what else? His reaction was one of horror. Italy is infamous for having slow mail service. And the letter had been sent weeks before, but it had got there, fortuitously, I might add, that night. And when was Enzo Ferrari inviting him to be at the headquarters in Maranello? When did he say that he would be glad to receive him and discuss his proposal? Well, it was none other than the very next morning, 600 kilometers away. Poor Scuderi calls his dad up, says, Dad, let me have the fastest car we have. I want the best car. Mine's not going to make it up there that fast, you know. And he drives all night long, and he winds up in this far off, just secluded place, seclusion. Enzo Ferrari was a recluse at the time. And so he gets there, and he's there like an hour early, and he falls asleep in the car, and he's late. And so the only thing that saves his situation there is the doorman of the hotel where Mr. Ferrari lived came out and said, hey, you can't be sleeping in our parking lot. You get out of here. And he said, I'm actually here to see Enzo Ferrari. He said, well, he's right there in his car waiting to get out. You're blocking him in. And so they move his little junker car, and he gets in the car with Enzo Ferrari, and, the gate guy went off to look for who owns the car, and so it's a big story. He's knocking on doors, and Enzo Ferrari's sitting there waiting for the gate guy to let him out of the gate. So anyhow, they get to the place, and they go in there, and Ferrari walks him through and shows him everything. At the end, he shakes his hand and says, why don't you start making all the interiors of Ferraris? And so his world changed drastically at that point. So what have we learned up to this point? Change hurts. When the silk trade and the silk prices dropped, you can either get mad and say this was a bad investment, or you could say, well, actually it gave us 440 years of prosperity in the silk trade. And instead of looking around saying, well, if silk isn't in, I have nothing. I've sorry. I've listened to people say, I've wasted my life here. Silkworms aren't in anymore. Look around the floor and see if there's any polyurethane tubes. Because maybe the stuff that's lying around what you were doing, maybe the gifts, the talents, the experiences, the MOs that you picked up, the resources that you tapped into while you were doing something, maybe there's enough crumbs that are falling from that table that when change happens, you don't have to sit down and cry. You can actually say, you know what? This stuff here is interesting. If that doesn't work anymore, polyurethane's interesting, and I've been playing around with it. I'm going to see if I can't heat mold some stuff together. So now this little boy, that's first thing we learn, is that change hurts. The second thing we learn is that there are no wasted time. You can look around and find things that will help you translate into your next position. The third thing is, despise not the day of small things, the Bible says. He's got one contract, it's Alpha 33, but it holds Alpha 33 together, and Alpha 33s hold him together, and that's what he's able to insinuate himself into Enzo Ferrari's life with. So don't worry about it. Don't ever, 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 ever stop knocking on the door. Keep knocking, keep trying, keep searching, keep seeking, and maybe because of your importunity. Now, I had a man in our church in Yucaipa. His name was John Boatman. He would get many blessings. He'd get many advantages in his life, and he would always just laugh and say, "Ask, what are they going to do? Take away your birthday?" And so he had no problem saying, "Hey, can we do this?" Or, "Hey, I'm gonna go ahead and serve this and do this," and he would get ahead. He would get things done and get things accomplished. Why? Because he was not afraid to ask. Well, Scuderi had that trait. Don't panic when life changes on you. Don't feel like you wasted years. Pick up the pieces off the floor, and don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to knock. Don't be afraid to put that job application in, because you might just get an invitation to sit down with Enzo Ferrari one day. So, man, his life changes drastically, okay? He pitches with confidence, and this is the way it worked. Mr. Ferrari listened to me. This is Scuderi talking. For not a very long time, and then simply said, "Why don't you start supplying some of these materials for my cars?" Okay, so then the interviewer, which subsequently, hey, you want to read a good book? I know. Can you see that? Or is the light too weird? You see that book? It's called Status Revolution by Chuck Thompson. This is a really good book, okay? And it's not really about what I'm talking about. This is just the part I'm using, okay? He says, I asked Scuderi about his own demeanor in the meeting. How had he presented himself? Had he presented himself as a luxury salesman with the perfect elevator pitch? Or a plucky kid from the south of Italy that just needed a break? Scuderi says, my attitude was neither that of a poor young man from the south nor a rich man showing his wealth. He said, neither of these are useful attitudes for success. What I did was make my technical competence evident. I made a promise to him of technical superiority and a promise to maintain it. From his side of the table, he saw a determined young man who knew a certain part of the business better than anyone else. So what I really, really want to encourage you to do is to not panic when change happens. Don't despise the day of small things. Pick up the pieces. Knock and ask and pound on that door until your knuckles are bloody. But don't ever quit knocking on that door, ever. Because if you stop, the potential, the opportunity is lost. Okay? Now, after this, okay, the term Adler Interiors is now synonymous with Ferrari. You cannot know anything or learn anything about Ferrari that Adler Interiors doesn't already lay out. Now, they are synonymous. Can I read you this? You want to talk about a success story? Let's read it. Adler Interiors became synonymous with Ferrari. Though Scuderi's roster of clients expanded as his reputation spread, he kept his promise of technical superiority, to which he'd soon add luxury grace notes long after Ferrari's death. He became a mastermind in fine leathers, in graphites, polyurethanes, carbon fibers. When Michael Schumacher was driving Ferraris to the top of the Formula One world in the 1990s and 2000s, he was doing most of it while surrounded by interiors conceived and manufactured by Scuderi's company. Today, Scuderi is the chairman of Adler Pelzer Group. The company has over 11,000 employees at more than 50 production facilities in 22 countries, research centers in Italy, the United States, China, England, Germany, Japan, Mexico, South Korea, and Turkey. In 2020, its sales netted $1.3 billion. More than 300,000 parts made of polyurethane, carbon fiber, and other materials are shipped from its production facilities every single day. If you drive one of the following makes, each of these are an Adler Pelzer client, there's a reasonable chance Scuderi had at least a tangential influence on its interior. If you drive an Alfa Romeo, Aston Martin, Audi, Bentley, BMW, Chrysler, Citroën, Ferrari, Fiat, Ford, GM, Honda, Hyundai, Jaguar, Kia, Maserati, Mercedes-Benz, a Mini, a Mitsubishi, Nissan, Opel, Peugeot, Porsche, Renault, Rolls-Royce, Saab, Skoda, I don't know how to pronounce that, Subaru, Suzuki, Tesla, Toyota, Volkswagen, and Volvo. If any of those are your cars, there is a good chance this man has touched your world. It's an empire that had a truant mail carrier detoured for just one more espresso or an afternoon glass of wine might never have come into existence. Yet for all the company's success on its global stage, Scuderi still doesn't talk about his wealth. He talks about the lingering hatred and chauvinism that they show towards southern Italy. And he says, the world will never hand itself to you. You must knock on the door. I want to use this story today to tell you that no matter if it's in outreach, evangelism, no matter if it's in ministry, if you've attempted a home missions church, if you've attempted to achieve something great and the letter didn't return, don't ever stop growing and don't ever stop performing in the pursuit of excellence. Because sitting down and crying and boo-hooing because you did not get what you wanted, that is never going to make you great. So let me repeat one more time. How was your attitude? How did you present yourself in front of Enzo? A luxury salesman with the perfect elevator pitch, or a plucky kid from the South just needing a break? He said, my attitude was neither that of a poor young man from the South, nor a rich man showing his wealth. Neither of these are useful attitudes for success. What I did was make my technical competence evident. If you will work on you, and you will keep knocking every door you see, every door you hear about, and even every door you can dream up and fathom, you never can tell if someone isn't going to open that door. And I have found that oftentimes when you knock, God will always open.